Welcome to Naresh IT. My name is Nataraj. In this video, I am going to talk continuation of previous video regarding JDBC connection pool. If I summarize that video discussion for a while, JDBC connection pool is a factory that contains set of readily available JDBC connection objects before actually being used. There are multiple advantages with the JDBC connection pool. Number one, reusability of connection objects. Number two, with the minimum connection objects, we can make maximum clients talking to database software. There are two types of JDBC connection pool. Client managed JDBC connection pool, server managed JDBC connection pool. Client managed, they are suitable for standalone application which are running outside the web server and application server softwares. Apache DBCP, C3P0, all these are the examples of what? Client-side JDBC connection pool softwares. Server managed JDBC connection pool. It is the connection pool that is created and managed in what? Web server or application server. It is really useful in the application that are deployable in web servers or application servers. Suppose we have a web application, definitely we deploy in web server or application server, and that web application wants to talk with the database software. Instead of creating JDBC connection object manually, better to use what? JDBC connection object collected from the connection pool. Which connection pool? What is need of using outside connection pool? Try to use what? Connection object gathered from server managed connection pool. So final conclusion is, in standalone application that runs outside the server, prefer what? Client side JDBC connection pool. In the application that are deployable in the server, like for example web application, it's suggested to work with what? Server managed JDBC connection pool. So in this video, I would like to talk more and more about what? Server managed JDBC connection pool. It is a connection pool that is created in what? Web server or application server software. So let's try to understand. As I discussed in other video, data source object represents JDBC connection pool, and for global visibility, data source object will be placed in what? JNDA registry, having nickname or alias name or what? JNDA name. And each connection object from connection pool must be accessed from what? Must be accessed from what? Connection pool through data source object, no doubt in that. So let's talk in a real environment, with respect to real environment. In one project, there will be one connection pool. Okay, who creates it? Team leader or project leader, and remaining members will use it. And all connection objects of connection pool represents connectivity with same database software. If your project is interacting with more than one database software, there is no wrong of creating multiple connection pool for multiple database softwares. If your project is talking with one database software, generally there will be one connection pool. Pointing to that connection pool, there will be one data source object, and entire team members in different applications of the project, they will use that particular connection pool connection objects through data source object. But to provide global visibility to this data source object, generally it will be placed in what? JNDA registry. And we need not to arrange JNDA registry separately. The moment we install any web server or application server, we will get one built-in JNDA registry. So let me put all these things together in the form of diagrammatic representation. I am assuming this is my web server. I am assuming this is my what? Web server. Here we have database software. So let's see. This is what? Web server oblique application server. This is what? Database software. What's the first one? TL or PL, team leader or project leader or senior employee of the team, generally makes web server or application server to interact with the database software and to create JDBC connection pool having set of readily available JDBC connection objects. Suppose if database software is Oracle, all connection objects in that connection pool represents connectivity with what? Same Oracle database software. Same Oracle database software. So what is this here? JDBC connection pool. What it contains here? Connection objects. This is one connection object, this is one connection object, this is one connection object, right? What is this? Data source object. Let me say this is my number 1. Number 1. In this process, what drivers will be utilized here? Type 1 oblique, 2 oblique, 4 driver. Yes, this is number 1. Number 2. TLRPL creates JDBC data source object where in web server or application server and makes that data source object pointing to the JDBC connection pool. That means not only data source object will be created and that data source object starts pointing to the JDBC connection pool. Why? You know that every connection object from connection pool must be accessed through data source object. That's why data source object must represent JDBC connection pool. So this is what? Number 2. Okay, that's nice. For providing global visibility to this data source object, for providing global visibility to this data source object, no doubt having JNDA name, this data source object reference will be placed in what? JNDA registry. This data source object reference will be placed in what? JNDA registry. So what is the JNDA name? DS JNDA. What is this? Data source object reference. What is this here? Data source object reference. Okay. So it will be placed here. So this I will call it as what? 3. Let me summarize the steps one more time. Number 1. TLRPL makes web server or application server to interact with the database software by using type 1 or type 2 or type 4 driver and creates a set of readily available connection objects in the connection pool. Number 2, TLRPL creates data source object representing JDBC connection pool. Number 3, for providing global visibility, okay, that data source object reference will be placed in what? JNDA registry. Okay. Let me talk about my next one. This is my client application. And again, let me clear, this client can be inside the server or outside the server. For our flexibility, I am taking outside the server. Outside the server means a normal standalone application who talks with the server and wants to get the connection object from connection pool through data source object. Inside the server means maybe a servlet component or JSP component or EJB component or some other deployable component in the server who wants to get the connection object from connection pool through data source object. So actually I am writing outside, but it can be inside the server or what? Outside the server. To give that feeling, what I do is, here also I will take what? A small box representing client. Yeah. This client is servlet JSP EJB component. This is what? Running outside a normal standalone application. What is number 4? Here I am not talking about the code, I am talking about the concept of how server managed JDBC connection pool works. You know that without accessing data source object, there is no possibility of getting connection object from connection pool. But right now data source object is where? In the JNDA registry. So what we have to do? First contact JNDA registry and get data source object reference from what? JNDA registry. So what is number 4 here? We write JNDI code to contact what? JNDA registry and to get data source object reference from JNDA registry. So ultimately, what is this? JNDI code to get data source object reference from JNDA registry. Data source object reference from JNDA registry. Yes, let me use bidirectional arrow. Nice. Okay, this is number 4. What is number 5, sir? On this data source object, again here we write some code. On this data source object, what method will be called? Get connection method will be called. Due to this, what happens? Control goes to data source object that is there in the server, because method is called on that object only. What this will do, since it is having communication with the connection pool, it represents one connection pool, gets one connection object from connection pool and returns to what? Client application. So ultimately calls get connection. This is powerful method here. Whenever this method is called on data source object, it will simply give one connection object from connection pool. So ultimate conclusion is get connection method on DS object reference to get connection object from connection pool. Connection object from connection pool. So how does it will? We call get connection method on DS. DS means data source object reference, which is gathered from, which is collected from JNDA registry. Because of that, this data source object that is there in the server gives one connection object from connection pool to what? Client application. So the arrows are this to this, this to this. Yes, ultimately we get the connection object from connection pool. That's nice. Once we receive the connection object, we don't sit idle. We'll try to create. Here we write one, some more JDBC code. What is that JDBC code? We use received JDBC connection object from connection pool to create other JDBC objects like statement object, result set object and number of objects, and to develop the persistence logic. What do you mean by persistence logic? The logic that talks to the database software and manipulates what? Database data. The logic that talks with the database software and manipulates what? Database data. I am going to, that logic will be placed here. So ultimately JDBC code based persistence logic. This is the ultimate purpose, because persistence logic. Fine. Okay, entire work is over. Then what we do? We call con.close method. What this will do? This con.close method releases connection object back to connection pool. Releases JDBC connection object, what here? Back to JDBC connection pool. Releases JDBC connection object back to JDBC connection pool. Con.close. Generally we think that it will cut the connection with the database software, but in this case releases the connection object back to JDBC connection pool. Releases the JDBC connection object back to JDBC connection pool. Fine. So this is how server managed connection pool works. In WebLogic server, there are wizards, there are administrative activities to create the connection pool and data source objects. And that connection pool we can use either in the standalone application or in what? Web components like Servlet JSP components. In Glassfish server we have provision, in Tomcat server we have provision, almost in all servers, yes, we have a provision to create what? Connection pool and what? Data source object. To create what? Connection pool and what? Data source objects. Let me explain the flow one more time. Number one, TLRPL uses type 1 or type 2 or type 4 driver to interact with the database software and to create connection objects in the connection pool. You know that all connection objects in the connection pool represents connectivity with what? Same database software. Number 2, data source object represents what? JDBC connection pool. Number 3, that data source object will be placed in what? JNDA registry having JNDA name, nickname or alias name. Number 4, client application, if it is written outside the server, standalone. If it is written inside that, okay, web component, EasyB component, that client application who are really interested to use the connection object collected from the connection pool, what it will do? It will uses JNDA lookup code, contacts JNDA registry, based on the JNDA name, it will access the data source object reference. Number 5, using the data source object reference, it calls get connection method. Because of that, one connection object from connection pool will be retrieved through data source object. And we know that once we got the connection object, we can create lot of JDBC objects, and we can use those JDBC objects to develop the persistence logic. Lastly, we call what? Con.close method. Because of that, connection object will be released back to what? JDBC connection pool. This is how server managed JDBC connection pool works. So what happens to this released connection object? Now that becomes free to give service to what? Another client or another request. Another client or another request, or sometime if that connection pool is used in multiple application, yes, it will become ready to give service to multiple applications also. But generally we create connection pool data source objects with respect to what? One project. That's why multiple requests coming to that project or multiple components of that project will generally start using what? The connection objects of the connection pool. Then you may ask me one question. How many types of connection objects are there? There are 2 types of JDBC connections. Number 1, direct connection. Direct JDBC connection. It is the connection object that is created by the programmer manually. So what is that? Knowingly, unknowingly, maximum times we will try to write what? 2 lines of code, class.forName driver manager.get connection method. Yes, these 2 things allows us to create what? JDBC connection object as a direct connection object. Class.forName, some driver class, you know that from Java 6 and JDBC 4 onwards, writing class.forName is almost optional. Okay, because most of the drivers are now designed supporting what? Auto loading of JDBC driver class. Driver manager dot get connection, some URL, username, password. But what it returns here? Connection object. Connection con is equal to this. So now let me say this is my direct connection. This is called what? Direct JDBC connection. Yes. What about other one, sir? Other connection is called pooled JDBC connection. Pooled JDBC connection. What do you mean by pooled JDBC connection? It is the JDBC connection that is gathered from what? JDBC connection pool through data source object. And entire industry prefers working with pooled connection. No one prefers working with what? Direct connections. Maximum times people prefers working with what? Pooled connection. Suppose somehow we got the data source object. Let us assume its reference is what? DS. Its reference is what? DS. Connection con is equal to ds dot get connection. I hope you are with me. Okay, connection con is equal to ds dot get connection. On the data source object reference, I am calling what method? Get connection method. So this gives me one connection object from what? Connection pool. So this is called pooled connection. What connection here? Pooled connection. But as I said, maximum cases the industry prefers working with what? Pooled connection, not the direct connection. So this is about server managed connection pool concept. Okay, in other videos I will show how to create JDBC connection pool in WebLogic server, how to create JDBC connection pool data source objects in what? Glassfish server and Tomcat server. Lots of people thinks that in Tomcat server what? Connection pool is not possible, but it's possible from version 6 onwards. This is the one reason nowadays people calling Tomcat as what? Application server. All these things I will talk in the coming videos. So thank you. I hope you benefited with this video. So you can catch me for more videos in this channel.